Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Conspiracy Farm, where we don't start the conspiracies, we just add the water. And now, your host of the most state-of-the-art, most informed podcast on the interweb, I present to you Pat Miletich and Jeffrey Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for war?
Cool. We are locked and loaded for yet another edition of the program, The Conspiracy Farm. I am your host, co-host, Mr. Jeffrey Wilson, hanging out with my dude, UFC Hall of Famer, Mr. Pat Miletich, and today we have, we're going to have an interesting show today, ladies and gentlemen. Why don't you know him a little bit more intimately, Pat? Why don't you introduce our guest today?
Yeah, a good friend of mine who came here from, he's originally from the Rhodesia / Zimbabwe area of the world in Africa. Southern Africa, and ended up in London. Family eventually fled there from the Civil War and all the unrest down in his homeland, and then made his way to Davenport, Iowa to become a doctor of chiropractic because he was a world-class rugby player for Rhodesia, and they actually beat the All Blacks, so they're very high-level rugby guys, and got a scholarship to Palmer College of Chiropractic, become a doctor of chiropractic, and that's how we initially met. He had a motorcycle accident, tore up his knee, and lost his scholarship, and ended up in my gym. We became real good friends, and got to know each other over the past, decade and a half, I believe.
Yeah.
It's been quite a while. So, he's right here with me. We're in Minnesota to do I'm doing a broadcast tonight for the fights on Access TV. Josh came up here with me. And so we're just hanging out, and perfect time to do a show with him.
Well, what's up, Josh? How you doing, brother?
Jeff, I'm very well, mate. Thank you very much for having me on, and I appreciate being here with you guys. I just have to correct Pat, if I may, for a second.
Okay.
My rugby prowess is not world class.
Oh, he's full of shit.
Part one and part two is, although we are the only nation, Rhodesia was the only nation to stay unbeaten against the very, very dominant All Blacks.
Yeah.
We only played them once, and I believe it was in the 20s. So you'll have to forgive me on that as well. But the facts still remain the same.
Well, I mean,
he was good enough to get a scholarship to Palmer, so he could play some damn rugby.
Yeah, he's modest. That's cool.
I met several All Blacks at Palmer who got the same scholarship, so obviously he knows how to play rugby.
Clearly. Well, and clearly a badass as a strength and conditioning coach for the old military fighting system as well.
Yeah, absolutely. He's trained a ton of fighters, ton of athletes, high school, college, professional athletes. So he's very good at what he does, very knowledgeable, and also because of I thought that it would be an ideal show for us, given what's going on in this country,
sure.
The potential for things to unravel in any nation. He experienced that, and I thought it'd be a great show so that people can get a perspective from someone who was there on the ground when things started to unravel in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. That they can sit up and go, wow, this is some scary stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, it truly is, man. And it goes, the nature of this show is to kind of, talk about this stuff, add water to some of these somewhat conspiracies. And one of the kind of the main themes we've talked about, Pat, is kind of the war on terror in this country, Gladio B, throughout really the world, Europe and in Africa. And, Josh, you have a little bit of insight, and we spoke off air yesterday, how that's being utilized, the war on terror in Africa still. And we spoke about oftentimes these wars, the war on drugs, the war on terror, is a guise for something else. And most oftentimes when it comes to these global wars, it's about natural resources. And you're seeing that play out. You're seeing the the jewel of the world, Africa, being not invaded, but pretty much extracted by Russia, U.S., China. Talk to me about what you're seeing in your native land, sir.
Well, so I think that everyone's well aware of colonialism from Europe in the the late 18th, early 19th century, coming in and taking over pieces of land in Africa. The main drive there was definitely resources, certain ores, gold, silver, tin, copper, and obviously diamonds as well. But also it was kind of like the immigration into the States. It was a quest to have something that meant that these people, disenfranchised people from Europe, would have a piece of the world that was theirs, and all the that sort of stuff that goes on. When the Europeans started leaving Africa, and the progression back to majority rule happened, there were two main backers of this progression, one being the former Soviet bloc nations and the other being the People's Republic of China. And monies and resources and training from those groups, those two countries, facilitated guerrilla warfare and terrorist warfare within those former colonies to oust the colonial powers that were there. Now that that's all said and done, pretty much, what we've seen is a huge amount of resources now still being extracted, still being removed from those lands by foreign nations, and now just the distribution points have become mainly China. I mean, I think everybody's got a little piece of it, so I'm not trying to say that it's only China. Sure. But especially in the areas, I want to say their investment in the last couple of years has been $500 billion into Southern Africa, as far as infrastructure and development and that sort of stuff. But the reason is to get those resources and take them home.
Sure.
Does that sort of answer that question?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and how, they're utilizing so many of these, military forces, proxy forces to achieve that end. The Clinton Foundation, through, documented paperwork, as well as the movie Clinton Cash, go as far as, facilitating and arming and funding what they call regime change. If you have certain leaders who don't want to give you mining rights for cobalt or copper or any of those things you mentioned, then, we need to go ahead and do what we need to do to get you out of there, to bring in a puppet or somebody friendly to our agenda.
Absolutely. I mean, there's an entire industry of mercenary units on the continent of Africa that have facilitated exactly what you're saying. And whether you have an overt presence of a foreign nation, or from bank accounts hidden in different parts of the world, delivering requests to these mercenary groups, and then they go ahead and take care of that. They'll go in and oust either the actual sitting presidents of those nations, and or they'll be called in by those sitting presidents to overwhelm an uprising, because Africa is one gigantic dictatorship, pretty much, and these presidents stay for long periods of time, and their people looking for change within their nations don't have that. So obviously they start rebelling, et cetera, and sometimes these mercenary groups are brought in to quell these uprisings that would try and bring about positive change for those nations too.
And describe how some of that would go down, how what they would do, their tactics, and the horrors that they would inflict on people.
Well, I believe we talked yesterday just about one little thing that I have a little bit of knowledge of, and that is when Rhodesia was Rhodesia and South Africa, before Mandela was released and came back into power, there was Rhodesia was suffering a war on two fronts. So we had Russian-supported ZAPU guerrillas mainly housed in Zambia, and then ZANU-PF guerrillas supported by China in Mozambique. And, fighting a war on two fronts is always an overwhelming challenge. So in order to destabilize that one of those groups, South Africa, who also shares a border with Mozambique, and Rhodesia got together, and they trained some disenfranchised guerrillas from Mozambique and turned them into a fighting force called Renamo. Renamo's role was to go back into Mozambique and create havoc and chaos, so that the government who was allowing these guerrillas to train and then insert into Rhodesia would have way too much on their hands and start having to deal with their own problems, and that's what went on. So the outcome of this whole thing is, 20 years later, is that Mozambique is one of the poorest nations in the world, horrifically hit with the most unbelievable carnage, landmines, just broken down infrastructure, just from the trickle effect of this just constant war that went on for a long, long time. So that's what, that's one of the ways in which these things come about, is that you create a rebel group or an ideological group in a place, you arm them, you teach them how to do their dirty work, and then you send them out to do that, exactly that. And you don't have to have a direct contact with them. It's like kind of a drone army, and
sure.
you set the spinning top going, and you just step out of the way, wow. and you have plausible deniability for the chaos that ensues.
Yeah, I was just going to say it creates that plausible deniability aspect. And it's so interesting, man, that, we talk about it on the show all the time, the Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution, and each country's doing it, to achieve their own end. Like you said, they're just mercenaries. They'll just hire these cats, completely distance themselves from them pretty much as far as any direct contact, but arm them and fund them and train them, just to create chaos. It's wild, man. And it's been going on for a very long time, like you said. It's pretty insane.
Right, and then for people who are listening to this, now you understand how ISIS was created. ISIS was created to take out Assad, because Assad is resisting the global bankers taking over his monetary system, et cetera, et cetera. And then it makes sense for people to understand, okay, the United States definitely could have had a part in this, even if they don't fully believe it,
sure.
which you and I know because we've seen pictures of John McCain with Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS,
yeah.
when they were called just the Free Syrian Army. That was ISIS, right? So they keep renaming the same group, right? Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, the this, the that. Look, man, these are all extremists that we've been funding all along.
And then utilizing, a PR firm in the United Kingdom to show beheadings, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that was shown up from the Iraq days. This whole thing is using a reality, but then distorting it through the media,
yes.
and allowing a different narrative to take place to allow whatever the grand scheme is to come about.
Yeah, and that's the huge part about all of this, man. And we've talked about it before, Operation Mockingbird, whatever you want to call it. The media's role, the complicity of the media in creating this narrative to achieve that. I mean, because they control how we perceive the narrative, how we perceive things. You know what I mean? I guess people like you and I can dig deeper and go through that, but most people, A, don't have the time, and A and B are kind of like ADD and just don't, just kind of get spoon-fed whatever they think is going on in the world. And it's very powerful. It's wickedly brilliant, in fact. But it's the media's role in this is absolutely huge.
Right, and I don't think that the CIA or the powers that be even need to control each media site, because the AP Wire puts things out, and these especially local news across the entire nation will report and say the same thing.
Exactly.
It's all fed onto their teleprompters. And so you can look at videos on YouTube of 40, newscasters sitting behind the desk in different cities around the country, reading the exact same script.
I've seen that. I've seen that.
The producers aren't even changing a word. They're just, dude, how hard is it to do your job when you're pulling stories off and just copying and saying, type that on the teleprompter for Jim tonight?
Yeah.
Right? It's pathetic.
No, and you're absolutely right. I was actually thinking about that before you mentioned that video. Literally, that's the narrative goes out to every different media market, big or small, and they just regurgitate the same line. And of course, that controls the narrative, and then thus controls our perception of what's going on. And it's crazy, man, because we set up that normalcy bias to convince people what we're talking about is going on is really going on. People think we're nuts. You know what I mean? Your government would never do, even though we're sitting here articulating a decades and decades precedent of this happening, people still like, no, there's no way. You understand what I'm saying? Like, it allows for things like Hillary Clinton to be possibly president of the United States. Like, how is that allowed? People have to be really fucking stupid to allow some shit like that to happen. Sorry, audience, not you guys. You guys, you know what I mean? Just
well, and obviously some very, the most powerful people in the world have been protecting her. And
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with the FBI reopening this case against her.
big
but
breaking news.
Is this mutiny at the FBI and them going to Comey and going, look, dude, you and your brother are going down if we don't reopen this?
So you were saying something off air. What's that association? Or was that Josh that said who somebody's wife? What's up with that?
So I'm not sure about the wife, but Peter Comey apparently works for the legal firm that does the taxes. I don't know how that works. I don't know what a legal firm does for taxes, but they're the ones that
There's tax attorneys, of course,
that look at the Clinton Foundation. Thank you. That's the clarification. That's when I step out of my realm of expertise there. Straight in the hole. But he works for the law firm that does the taxes for the Clinton Foundation.
Peter Comey. Is that John James? Okay.
Exactly.
Wow. No conflict of interest there at all.
None.
Well, and the more we look at this stuff, the way, major network news heads and broadcasters, how they're connected to, the Clinton Foundation or the Clinton Initiative or this or that.
Sure.
How people in the administration are related to people at network news, some of the heads. It's so incestuous throughout the control networks of our country. It's sickening.
It will.
Anyway, back to.
Okay, go ahead.
Get back. I want to get back to Josh, and maybe Josh can talk about, the ranches, the farms, that his family and other families were running down there, and describe the compound and what the tactics were of these terrorist guerrilla groups that would come in and do their dirty work.
Yeah.
Well, so these groups there were small groups of men. Initially, I think they were dissidents that had political motivation. They exiled the country. They got special training, either on the borders of the country, within these friendly nations, or some of them were sent directly to China, to the Soviet Union, and they got some more hands-on stuff and indoctrination, et cetera. And what ended up happening was these very small groups would then go into villages and press gang, coerce, whatever you want to do, all of the above, young men and women, and then extract them to training camp bases within Mozambique and within Zambia. And then those guys would slowly trickle in on foot in small groups into the very rural population of Rhodesia at the time. These small groups would show up on a farm, and farms in Africa are very much larger than the normal farm here in the United States, and they have a workforce associated with it. The technology wasn't as acute as some of the stuff that we have here right now, so it required a lot of workforce, and that workforce was all housed on the farm, in housing, in a housing area. They call it the compound. But anyway, these guys would show up at the compound after dark, would request food, would request supplies and intel about the farmer and their family, the goings on that farm. Usually, women were provided for these men, and they would set about a plan to attack the farmer on his property, and that could come in many forms. A lot of the time, they were carrying landmines, so mines were used to blow up vehicles on the farm, on the roads, or as a secondary thing. So if they attacked the farmhouse, they might have a landmine on the dirt road that went from the blacktop to the farmhouse. So whenever security forces, or what every farmer in Rhodesia had at the time was a thing called the Agric Alert, which was a shortwave radio. So if you experienced an attack, you would get on that immediately, and it would call all the surrounding farms. They were always in the main bedroom of the house, and it would call all the surrounding farms, and every one of those gentlemen would suit up, they'd get their weapons, they'd hop in trucks, and they would head towards the farm that was being attacked.
Wow.
To help defend against that. And these guys would show up, and then there would be a landmine on the road on the way up to the house, and that would
Holy
that
shit.
would and that sort of stuff. So farmers would be sitting there side by side with their wives, loading and firing weapons against these intruders that were attacking them. It was a nuts period of time.
Wow. And what years were this?
So it started in the late 60s, very, very gently and quietly. I don't know if gentle is the right way to say it, but quietly. And then it progressed, and it got bolder and bolder and bolder, all the way up until 1980 was the actual Civil War. And then after independence was granted to a gentleman called Muzorewa and then Mugabe in 1980, the insurgencies continued because you had two main factions that they wanted control of the entire unit of Zimbabwe, and one of those factions got into power and the other one felt disenfranchised from that. So they continued their own little war using exactly the same tactics. So whatever farmers were still on the farms after independence, those guys became targets again all the way into, it continued happening definitely into the early 90s, and then pockets thereafter would continue up until 2002, 2003. So these things don't go away. It's a constant seeking of resources and control of those resources.
Yeah. So what's the situation now in 2016?
Well, you've got a guy who's been the president for where are we at? 80. So he's been there for 36 years. He's Zimbabwe was known as the breadbasket of Africa, the number one producer of tobacco in the world, and now it's in ruins. Aid, non-government organizations are in there providing aid, food, healthcare, water, etc., for the population that are still there.
While the Chinese are extracting the resources.
Yeah, and 747s of Chinese immigrants show up every single week, and they're the ones that are now populating the lands that were removed from the white and black farmers throughout about 36 years.
What's cool, though, Josh will explain about having a different shelf for uniforms, food, and all this other stuff that they were instructed to give to these terrorists when they demanded things, and talk about the uniforms and what we're done with those.
So every one of these farms...
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but, dude, if things unravel, I want this dude with me.
It sounds like it, shit, man. You've seen it.
So there were all sorts of crazy things that went on. When you fight a terrorist war, your tactics have to get dirtier because the people that you're dealing with are dirty,
right,
as well. It has to get really nasty. So things like every one of these farms had a little farm store on it where the workers could get food and clothing and transistor radios and batteries and just odds and ends, just a general store. And in these stores, the security forces would put overalls and jackets and clothing items, and they would be laced with poison. They would have been dipped in poison, and then the guys that ran the store were instructed to put them on a particular shelf, and those were never to be touched. And invariably, these guys would show up, and they would, rob the store. They'd take whatever they wanted, and hopefully they would grab these uniforms, these overalls and jeans and jackets and shirts, and they'd wear them into the bush. And as they sweated, the poison would leach out of the clothing and into them, and they would drop like flies.
Holy shit, that's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. Another thing they used to do is they would put transistor radios, and they would put tracking devices and all sorts of goofy little explosive stuff in those, and those two would also be known about by the guy that owned the store or ran the store, and that would, they would steal those too, and it would allow us to find out where they were and also help, get rid of them as well.
Right. Holy shit, that's crazy. That's wild, man. Cool tactics, like you said, man. You got to get grimy, especially. I mean, these guys are just straight mercenaries, man. They don't, cutting off 12-year-old heads, like they don't care. So you got to yeah, man, you got to fight fire with fire for real.
I mean, it's pretty crazy. Just to give the listeners an idea of what we're talking about, my uncle had a vehicle that was it was a Land Rover, which is a 4-wheel drive pickup truck, and then that was all up armored. So something that you would see on the roads in Iraq right now. In fact, the landmine protection vehicles that you see in Iraq and Afghanistan right now are 100% knockoffs of the vehicles that were used in Zimbabwe, in Rhodesia, and then in South Africa, because landmines was such a ubiquitous thing. Wow. So now we are against these, but back then they had access to real landmines from the Chinese and from the Russians. And I want you to imagine a pickup truck, and then you go and put a bunch of, half-inch steel plate all the way around it, bulletproof glass, and then on top of the there'd be firing ports where you could shoot out of the vehicle at if you were blown up, what they would do is usually you'd detonate a mine, and it might take off the front end, for example, and then they would come up and small arms would take the rest of the people out. So you had to have a way of defending yourself from that, or you'd be driving along the road and there'd be a boulders or a tree had been cut and dropped over the road, or whatever, just to stop you, and then they'd attack the vehicle like that. So on top of his vehicle, he had a drum. I want you to imagine something the size of a large serving plate that was mounted on the roof, and then out of that had 12 short 12-gauge barrels coming out. Its nickname was the spider gun, so you kind of get the idea of every different angle, slightly angled downwards, slightly more horizontally, so you would have a spread of fire. And the mechanism inside that would then be fired by a crank handle in the roof of the Land Rover. And if you were ambushed, you hit an ambush, you would just turn the crank on this, and it would just spin on the roof, and off would go these double up buck shots to hopefully take out whoever was trying to attack you. And that was normal farm life. That's going.
I was just going to say, how frequent was this?
That's how you dealt with dealing with a farm every single day. That's how you lived. I mean, I don't remember a time when our parents would go anywhere with our arms. They were always armed.
That's crazy.
And on the farm, you were always armed. It didn't matter what was going on. My aunt and uncle were always armed. The farm manager was always armed. And it just became part and parcel of life. That's just how you lived your life, And on top of it, these same farmers that would run their farms for six weeks, and then the entire nation was on a 6-week rotation. So you would have 6 weeks being a civilian, doing whatever you did, whether you were a farmer, a doctor, a chiropractor like my father, and then 6 weeks you would get in your vehicle and you go to a base and you would become a soldier, and you'd spend 6 weeks in the bush, and then you'd come back to 6 weeks of your real life, and then 6 weeks in the bush, and that went on for 10 years. That was life, So.
Damn.
And that's the entire nation. There was nobody that didn't do it. If you were an older gentleman or some had some sort of infirmity that didn't allow you to participate full out, what you did was you're a reserve policeman, so you would drive around at night and check on things and basically just keep every set of eyes were looking out for these guys that were trying to create havoc and mayhem. Bayonet parties, throwing little babies up in the air and catching them in the end of their AK bayonets.
Whoa. What?
Mate, well, again, when terror is the weapon being used because you're a small force against a perceived larger one, you have to be the nastiest, most evil people on the planet to generate the result of a large army going against you. So you create this devastation.
Whoa,
I mean,
bro! You're saying they would toss babies in the air and catch them on their bayonets?
Yes, mate. I mean, there are pictures all over the internet.
Fuck that.
One time they shot down a 727 with an RPG. It was taking off from Kariba or going to Kariba. I don't exactly remember, which is a big lake there. And it crashed the plane, and then they went to the crash site, and anybody that was still alive, they killed. They killed everybody. And I see it right now. There's a horrible picture of I think it was a little girl killed with a bayonet.
Damn, bro. I was in a pretty darn good mood with this Hillary news, and you just like curveballed all that. Wow.
Yeah, it was a horrific time, and I'm speaking to my remembrance and my experiences. There were two young ladies that were at school with me. Two little girls were my schoolmates. I was in class with one of them, and then one of them was a little younger. And they went home with their grandparents one night, and boarding schools were the norm. So you would spend all week at the boarding school, and then you'd go home on the weekends or every other weekend, depending on how old you were and the setup of that boarding school. But they went home on a Friday night, and they were greeted by these men, and they were drug out, and the grandfather, I believe, was killed straight away, and horrific things were done to the grandmother, and my little friends were swung like baseball bats against one of the farm buildings, grabbed by the legs and had their heads melted against the walls. They were horrific. I mean, we're not talking about people. We're talking about animals that would do this. And again, there is no difference from the stuff I'm describing to you right now, okay, and the things that ISIS has been accused of doing, et cetera, et cetera. You strike fear amongst the population to control them and to make sure that your bidding is the one that's done and not the bidding of the other guy. And that's how that works. I mean, the population was so terrified and so shell-shocked by the fact that they were the ones in the middle. They were the ones in the middle.
And then you fast forward to, not that long ago when Hillary was the head of the State Department, $6 billion turns up missing, gun running through Libya, ends up in the hands of ISIS. We arm them. We know we changed the name for the purposes of letting the American public know that we're arming terrorists, but they're called the Free Syrian Army, which end up being ISIS, and the stuff that they're doing. And you realize, it dawns on you how horrible things are from a financial standpoint, funding these psychos, these animals, by our own State Department, by Hillary Clinton's signature, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, it's always, Bill Clinton brought in Fethullah Gulen. It's always to achieve, utilization of these things for a larger political end. It's just, I just can't. It's twisted, man. It's really, really twisted.
This is the guy who's got schools all over the place teaching extremism, correct?
Oh, yeah. Over in Pennsylvania, $20 billion foundation net worth.
And it's being allowed to go on in this nation.
Yeah, I mean, and they're facilitating it all over the world. Part of some of the stands that we've seen, like there's proxy armies everywhere, man. Gladio B is in full effect throughout the world.
I tell you what's fascinating. I just watched a documentary on Saudi Arabia, and how the government organizations there, for example, the education board, facilitates the printing of these books that go out to schools across the Arab world, and inside these books, these young kids, I'm talking 6, 7, 8-year-old kids, are reading and regurgitating, things like every Christian must die. Mm-hmm. If they do not come to Allah, we must behead them all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these are the pieces that are being sent to schools here and throughout the world to continue this narrative of evil and hate, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's mind-boggling because more and more, I mean, I've been on this information for quite a while, as is Pat, and of course we've been the crazy people for a very long time, and then thanks to more information, the internet, YouTube, WikiLeaks, letting the masses know, that it is a chess game, and it's an ugly chess game, and we are funding with a lot of our allies, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Israel, etc., funding these proxy armies and going around doing Aleppo is what, 500,000 people are dead, and that's in Syria, and it's insane.
It is, and but you wonder what's going on here. What is the purpose then, Jeffrey, of allowing these psychopaths? I mean, we're not stripping the U.S. citizenship of people who go over to Syria and train. They're allowed to come back here and keep their citizenship. Is that so we can prosecute them? What the hell's going on? We know that there's also terrorist training facilities in the United States. Why are they being allowed to continue? What's going on with we see these the examples of this stuff going on all over the world in different smaller countries. So what are they doing to the United States? What's the purpose? Is it to extract resources, or is it for a bigger purpose to just completely destroy the nation, the only nation where citizens truly can, besides a few others, but where Americans carry guns, they understand the thought of America was the greatest thing, the greatest thought ever created, of that self-independence, self-determination, that do we destroy America so that there's nobody left to fight us, right?
Well, and we're the last semblance of that. Everything's a union now, the African Union, the American or the European Union, and the Amero and all that. So it's like they're trying to get rid of sovereignty and borders, and they're trying to turn that thing that we know as the land of the free and home of the brave upside down on its head. The more terror happens, and now they've blended it into lone wolf people, you know what I mean, and returning veterans and Rand Paul supporters and libertarians. So they're blending this. Now, a terrorist is not just this, Muslim terrorists. It's now lone wolves, and a slow an erosion of all of our rights in the name of fear and fighting terror is, I feel, what's going down.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if I may step in here, I'm a very, very, very grateful man that I ended up here in the States, and I feel blessed that my children get to be Americans and get to live in this great nation. And if I may say to the listeners out there, this is a precious entity. Your Constitution is the most precious document, second to the Bible, and if we allow any erosions of that, what we're doing is walking a path down to being munchkins, controlled by whatever globalist thought process there is.
And we slowly have. What is it in the last year or two? The NDAA 2, or the second version of it, the indefinite detention of Americans and the possible assassination of Americans under dubious circumstances, the denial of due process. Like, we're already there. It's just that boiling frogs thing.
Yeah. And like I was saying on one of the previous shows, how the Patriot Act, when it was put in, guys like Ron Paul were warning, you do not want to get this started. You don't want to head down this road. Then now, as I said, there's a new law where local law enforcement can have access to all the surveillance on any individual they want without subpoena, I believe. And so they can pull up all of your history and go after you, then tie that to Soros funding Black Lives Matter, causing the media working, showing police a shooting where it actually was a justified shooting, but they'll initially report it that the man was unarmed or wasn't doing anything wrong, the Michael Brown hands up, don't shoot garbage, and then tie that all together with federalizing police, the NDAA, imprisoning you for no reason and indefinitely. You tie all that whole apparatus together, and you see the big picture of what the end goal for these scumbags are. And I said again before, Americans are good people. For the most part, they're really good people. They don't think this way. They don't think diabolically. They don't understand and don't see into the future. Apparently, I have the ability to think like these scumbags. I can almost cut them off at the pass, and for some weird reason, I've always... And you have the same sense, Jeff, and because of what Josh has been through in life, he certainly has it, that you can see into the future and see what these people have planned.
I think too that it's fascinating right there that the media and the narrative of that is going hand in hand with separating us.
Mm-hmm.
We become a broken people when we separate. When we look at each other, whether it's ethnically or racially or religiously, and see horrific differences where there aren't any. If I may take a little segue back to Africa again, it didn't take, but I want to say 40 years of colonial rule and the resulting ethnic. I got to change that. There was no real ethnic difference between the Hutus and the Tutsis. There was this presumption by the French that ran it that lighter-skinned, more European, facial structured individuals would be pulled in, and those guys would be educated and allowed to be clerks in shops and teachers, and they were brought in and educated, and the darker skinned, traditionally more African descended looking people, they were kept in
Abject poverty.
In abject poverty. They are the ones that cleaned the streets and built the roads and were in the farms, and that distortion was created where there was none.
You're
and
absolutely
then you
right.
had a Tutsi, and that was they spoke the same language, they shared the same religion. There was no difference. It was a perceived difference by colonial power that then turned into this horrific rivalry, where you get 1 million people killed in 6 weeks by each other. And that's the same stuff that's going on here, where there is a separation. We are all Americans, and we are starting to be told by the media, by things going on, that no, we are Americans, but you're black, I'm white, they're racist, and instead of going,
rich, I'm poor.
They're rich, I'm poor,
Yeah.
they believe in this, that, and the next thing, they're trying to hold us down, they're taking our jobs, and the result is that we start looking at each other instead of looking at them.
Exactly.
And that's the problem. That's where this has to go. We have to reunite and go, we cannot be sheeps to this bullshit. We have to go, we are Americans, we deserve better. The Constitution is our document. It reflects us. And I'm not even bringing in the Native Americans because I think they've got an even harder line on it. But all of us should look to each other, pull together, and look for a difference and a change in this thought process before we end up like everyone else. There is not a country out there that still has a constitutional document which allows the people to, just like Pat says, if that time happened, to be able to reconnect with their freedom. There are no other countries like that, and they all live under the power of the government, regardless of how it looks on the surface. We're sheep, and we are being factory farmed. We are a resource, and the resource is being extracted, and that's it. That's all we need to understand.
That's true, man. And the premise, the solution will always be off unless we recognize that the premise is off. Like, we have to see that there is a problem. Take the red pill, if you will, to use another Matrix metaphor. We have to wake up, man, because it's so dangerous. It is so, and it's been dangerous. But the hundreds of thousands of millions of people that have been allowed to be killed under these false wars and all this horse shit, we got to break this cycle, man. We have to.
So how do you break it?
Awareness, man. We all have to start being more responsible for our own awareness. And like I said, just wake up, read, stop.
But remember, it takes a person like, if Hillary Clinton were to win this election, which with this new FBI investigation, I have no idea how the hell she's going to pull that off. But we've seen people finding in warehouses crates and crates of ballots that are already marked for Hillary Clinton, right?
Yeah.
Crates of these things, okay? 25,000 of them that are going to be fed into the system, right?
All dead
in
people.
different places all over the country, right? So if she does end up president, that's where the people have to go, you know what? her rally today, how close was the camera to the stage?
They couldn't even do a wide shot, right? Exactly.
They couldn't do a wide shot. There wasn't enough people there. You're in Iowa, next to Iowa City, just up the road, which is a liberal hotbed. There are like 300 people there, Jeff.
Yeah.
300 people is what it looked like to me. Okay, there's no way in hell she's matching. If Trump shows up in Iowa, dude, he's got 15,000 people there, at least. It's nuts. Down in Florida, he filled a massive stadium. Another guy had to give up his aircraft hangar, and there was 5,000 people outside that couldn't even get in, right?
Yeah,
and you know how big the aircraft hangar is. So if she ends up in, you know it's fixed, you know it's garbage, and so then the people have to say, you know what? Like I suggested on a previous show, all the American people you can legally file an extension on your taxes, and everybody across the board does that. What does the government do then? Do they arrest all of us?
Right.
Can they arrest all of us? That's millions of people, right?
Yeah. It's a mean prospect there. I mean, in tandem with a bunch of other things, we got to start voting with our dollars. When, like I said, we have to wake up. We have to take more responsibility for our awareness. I mean, Hillary Clinton just shouldn't be there. If people have any knowledge of what she's been doing the last 30 years, dating back even 40 years, dating back to Arkansas with Bill and funneling cocaine money and all of it, she just shouldn't be there. The system and the establishment's been protecting all those guys for a very long time. And it just, we got to change, man. Got to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And then the constitutional states constitutional convention, and then stage 3 is not good, right? It's none of that works.
Yeah. Well, that's why I was so happy today, until Josh told me his story and totally brought my mood down. But I was so happy to see, the FBI is going to reopen. It seems like accountability might actually come. You know what I mean? Like there is some semblance of justice and accountability that actually is going to be meted out to this woman.
Is there, like I said, is there mutiny at the FBI? Is that why this is happening?
Exactly.
What's going on?
Because the timing is quite bad for her. Like this, even if the FBI document he put out was like, hey, this might not mean anything, whatever, but it's just horrible PR for the campaign.
Yeah.
And if I may, I mean, you did ask me a question about how Zimbabwe is now. There are several chunks of time when genocide was occurring within those walls, and the rest of the world has been completely kept out of it, and the stories have been completely quashed. There's a story about Antelope Mine where they found thousands of bodies in a mine shaft. So what would happen is the security forces of Zimbabwe would go into a rural area. They'd block off the roads that entered into that area, on a Monday, for example, and then by Thursday they would dip out, and there's not a chicken alive, there's not a goat alive, there's not a building that hasn't been burned to the ground, and the population have all been, see the air quotes, moved to a different location. That's what happens. So Mugabe came in, and every single firearm was registered, every single firearm, and the calibers that were military calibers. So 308 and 223 was not a
right.
It would not be around that would be okay to use, but 308 and 7.62 by 39, okay. The AK round were. You can't even buy those. That's not even something you could ever find on the shelf. You can't own those weapons. And then every weapon that you had, you were only given a ration of, I want to say, 50 rounds of ammunition for that particular gun. So if you had a 243 hunting rifle, which would be used for a deer, you would have 100 rounds or 50 rounds of that caliber that year. And if you ran out of those, you were done. Same with shotguns, same with 22s. And that way, they reduced the entire ability of that population to ever regain control of their lives.
Yeah, okay? A disarmed population is not a free population, that's for sure.
Yeah, and right now, recently, in the last 6 months, there was a church-driven resurgence trying to get all the corrupt situations being brought to the population and brought to public. And I mean, the police went in and with their jackboots and beat the shit out of everybody, interned people without trial. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do. You can go to Hitler's Germany, you can go to Stalin's Russia, you can go to any number of South American countries.
Exactly.
This is how you control a population. You remove their ability to self-determine, and then you shut down any. We used to sit, as a family, and even in our own home with no one else around, when any sort of political discussion would come up, it was everybody would hush, and my parents would reiterate every single time, we do not speak about this stuff outside of this home. We don't. They were in mortal fear of somebody saying they heard somebody say something, and next thing you know, you end up in there's a prison there called Chikarubi.
Knock on the door. And
you go in, with a 90% HIV population, you don't ever come out. You either die there or you catch something that you die of. And that's how you do it. You control it through fear, and that's what they will use for us.
Yeah, and we're seeing the beginning stages of that with political correctness, safe spaces, people losing jobs for stating what's on their mind. This is just
refusals at DUI checkpoints and having blood extracted if you refuse. They did it in Missouri. Missouri police was taking blood when people refused DUI, swabs.
Right.
It's happening.
Yeah.
Well, Josh also writes children's books, ladies and gentlemen. I joke.
Yeah, I'm a really good bedtime story guy.
Never sleep again. Well, gentlemen, I actually have to boogie and pick up my little one from school. I hope, Pat, you want to close on anything? Or Josh, you guys want to close up with any final thoughts?
I just want to say thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about this, and I hope that what we've talked about today will engage other conversations about this. And that's how we do this. In our small groups, the people that we love and care about and that we talk to, it doesn't have to be a debate. It just has to be a seeking of truth and an understanding that these are the ways in which populations are controlled, subdued, and yeah, in the end,
and subsequently destroyed. Yeah.
And we have children, all three of us.
Yeah.
To think about their futures and how hard are you going to fight to stop this type of garbage from happening in your own nation, because we see the beginnings of it with these globalists, these socialists, these elitists, and what they're doing.
Yeah, man, heavy stuff, dude. Seriously, this was an awesome episode. I knew it would be. We'll just obviously have to get you back on sometime as the world unfolds. We'll see if it implodes or what exactly happens, especially with old Hillary and Donald after the election. Man, thank you so much, Josh Howat, former strength and conditioning coach for Miletich Fighting System, and freaking a downright cool-ass dude with some hella stories. Wow. Gave me a lot to think about today, seriously.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It was a pleasure being on, my friend. Thank you for walking me through this.
Absolutely. Pat, you guys have an awesome weekend. Have some killer fights tonight, and I know you do a kick-ass job as always announcing them bad boys.
All right, brother, and looking forward to the next episode. It's going to be good.
Absolutely. Everybody stay tuned. There will be more. Take care, everybody.